Hello, and welcome to the webinar, The Strategic CFO, Maintaining a Competitive Edge in Uncertain Times. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, then we'll dig into our discussion. First, we would like to thank Coupa for their partnership with today's event. They've been wonderful thought leadership partners to Argyle, and they're committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. Thank you again to Coupa. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum. I also wanted to take a minute to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy, as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. For those of you who are seeking CPE credit today, you must answer at least 3 polling questions and remain on the session for its duration. Polls can be found under the Polls tab on the right-hand side of your console, right next to Chat. Afterwards, if you're eligible to receive credit, you will receive an email with a link to your certificates. If you have any questions about credits, please email cpe@argyleforum.com. Finally, and most importantly, please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. Let's begin. Ulrika, over to you, please.
Thanks, Eric, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Ulrika Haug. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Coupa, who is the leading business spend management platform that helps you unify your finance, procurement, and supply chain processes, just in case you're not familiar with whom we are. We're excited to be with you here today to talk about how CFOs and finance leaders such as yourselves are maintaining their competitive edge during these uncertain times. I mean, it seems like every week there's a new headline. I think recently we saw with some of the volatility in the financial system, with the US Treasury Department shoring things up with the banks. And so we've actually run a survey that interviews 600 CFOs and finance leaders to get a pulse on how they are managing and dealing with these uncertain times. And so we're going to walk through the results of that survey and talk about it with our esteemed panel here today. So Jeremy, Kevin, and Tony, I'll hand it off to you to introduce yourselves to the group here.
I'm happy to start.
Kevin,
I'm happy to start. Kevin Permenter with IDC. IDC is a full-service market research firm specializing in tech, high-tech software. Just to, give the high level there. My particular area inside of IDC is to focus on financial apps. So that's everything from your small business accounting stuff all the way through to the big, ERPs, and then into key point solution areas like spend management, like rev management. And I'm happy to be here.
Great. We're happy to have you here too, Kevin. Jeremy.
Hi, everyone.
Do you want to introduce
everyone. So I'm Jeremy Hammond, Head of Group Finance and CFO of the financial entities at Primetals Technologies, based in Austria, but we present everywhere around the world. Primetals is a global leader in steel engineering. So we build and maintain and improve steel plants for all steel makers around the world.
And Tony.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Tiscornia. I'm the CFO of Coupa Software, and I've been here at Coupa for 10 years or so. And as Ulrika mentioned at the outset a bit about Coupa, I mean, I'll just add, we're focused on helping companies manage all their business spend, across sourcing, procurement, invoice, expenses, payments, analytics, everything with respect to data. And we have an incredibly strong community of customers using Coupa that share insights, data to optimize their spending activities. And ultimately this allows companies to be more efficient, faster, more productive, and really drive meaningfully increased bottom line profits by saving costs and increasing efficiency. So really glad to be here with you all today.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for those introductions, gentlemen. And let's just dive right into the data. Because as finance people, we all love the numbers. So this survey was taken, this is for at the end of 2022. And in that survey, it said that 90% of CFOs and finance leaders, such as yourselves, or basically everyone's concerned about what's happening in the environment. And specifically what they said they were concerned about is 42% said they were concerned about declining profitability and margin, so they're feeling the squeeze there. Related to that, 39% are concerned about meeting payroll, and 37% were concerned about falling behind the competition. So it seems like many finance leaders, such as yourselves, are really feeling the squeeze on both ends, from both like a cost perspective as well as from a demand perspective, which of course impacts revenue. So what exactly are those external factors? And it seems like that there's some internal pressures, but obviously there's external uncertainty as well. So some of the external uncertainty that CFOs and finance leaders have said that they're concerned about are the three that you see at the top: rising costs of goods, regional or local political instability or geopolitical instability, and of course, I think very hot topic right now globally, I would say, is rising interest rates, whether it's the European Central Bank or the US Federal Bank that are giving indications and raising interest rates in order to temper down some of the economy. I'd love to hear from you all. Does this resonate with you? I imagine that these factors impact industries a little bit differently. And which maybe Jeremy, we can start with you. Like, when you look at these factors, which of these would you say have maybe impacted your company or that you're seeing within your own network?
Thanks, Ulrika. What you've mentioned the obvious now, of course, naturally rising interest rates or rising costs, including wages at the moment, have an impact on our price list now. So we have to adjust, just like a lot of company, applying a back-to-back approach in what we're currently facing. But from my side, if I look at really the past month, I would really stick with the first reply that most of the CFOs acknowledged. Really on our side, global delays on supply chain impacted our business. I mean, clearly, zero COVID policy, for example, in China, looking back at this, has impacted and has delayed the way we would normally turn order intake into revenue streams. An example, basic electronic components that normally would take days to be delivered took and still take weeks, and at time it took months to get them delivered. So while we were rather good at the moment in terms of post-COVID recovery for orders on heavy machinery, everything that requires maintenance work or standard electronic replacement of equipment would be delayed quite largely compared to the standard.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, from your perspective, just digging into that a little bit more, Jeremy, do you think that's going to continue? Like, what do you think, or do you think do you see that improving in the, let's say, 6 to 12
Absolutely,
months?
it has improved. What I must say is still on the agenda now is really trying to learn as well from the mistakes from the past, and looking now, which is a little bit new for CFOs, but looking at geopolitical tension, which is not really on the list now, but is definitely, let's say, unforeseeable at the moment. We'll have in January the Taiwanese election, which is a must-watch event, looking at what we faced. I mean, we saw in Russia how irrational could tension escalate, and that's an understatement. So on our side, is really looking at how this will potentially impact us in the coming month.
Yeah. Jeremy, you mentioned how having to really forecast or foresee, given potential, political instability, is somewhat new. Kevin, do you see that with the CFOs and finance leaders you interact with? I know we've talked in the past about the evolving role of the CFO and how that's really changed, and how the CFO really has to consider more things more than maybe has traditionally been taken. What's kind of your perspective there?
Yeah, I think it underlines some of the things that we talk to. Just a little bit of level setting here. My job, I'm not on the front lines like these guys. My job is to talk with CFOs and financial leaders, help them build short lists, help them sort of navigate their way through their digital transformation, as it were. And in talking with them, you absorb some of their anxiety, you absorb some of their fears about what's in front of them, and sort of you understand there are some key priorities that they're dealing with, and they're looking to technology to solve it. And yes, long story short, the instability, the uncertainty has just become so pervasive to a place where I think what Jeremy highlighted here is something that keeps happening, which is the job keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now there's the chief political science officer. You add that to the equation. So not just hey, help me stay afloat, help me figure out the future when it comes to my cash, all that stuff, and now predict geopolitical impacts on the world economy. It just the job just keeps getting more complex, which is why the focus more and more has been on advanced technology, especially for analytics, so that you can give Jeremy and his partners in this world issue all the tools that they need to kind of figure these things out.
Mm-hmm. And maybe this is an open question for all three of you, but what do you think the outlook is for later this year and maybe even to 2024? And how are you thinking about it within your own finance organization in terms of how you're anticipating that?
Yeah, maybe I can chime in on that, Ulrika. I think as Jeremy highlighted, and Kevin as well, it's a complex, spider web of different kind of interconnected, friction points out there in the world across geopolitical concerns. We've got supply chain issues and delays and price increases. We've got inflation and a lot of action by the ECB and the Fed and other, central kind of governing agencies with respect to the cost of capital and the impact that has on the economy and demand. And then we've got, of course, now we have bank risks, here in the U.S. with regional banks, which I'm sure consumed everyone on this call's 48 hours of their time a couple of weeks ago at least to deal with. And so, the way I look at it, Ulrika, is that, and many that I've spoken to, is that the top line is kind of in question, right, for companies, meaning what is the level of demand going to be out there given the increase in price and given the cost of capital. It's harder for companies to raise money. Debt and equity raises, equity markets are down. It's more expensive to raise cash to spend on things, right? And so what does that mean? I think it means that you should focus on things that you can control, right? Which are more around your spending. It's something that you're actively doing. And I think many of the CFOs I've spoken to are focused on profitability, right? In an uncertain demand environment where the top line is a little more unstable or harder to predict, I would say. And as far as the outlook you mentioned, Ulrika, I'm hopeful. I mean, this is as Kevin mentioned, we kind of have to become geopolitical experts and or pretend to be, or economists, if you will. But the one thing that gives me some hope about perhaps the back half of the year stabilizing a bit is the rate environment. I think that the expectation today, the U.S. Fed probably hike rates by 25 basis points, maybe even zero, likely 25 basis points, which is, a decline from the torrid pace they've been on recently. And I think folks hope that if we can get stability in interest rates, we can kind of, have solid footing and know, okay, now interest rate hikes are kind of settling down or stopping for the near term or the next year, what have you. We don't want to bank yet on any interest rate decreases, but at least we have a clear picture of what the rate environment looks like. And that may be the first step in creating some stability where people are grounded and can make, decisions going forward. And for me, I'm hopeful that that's really starts in the back half of the year, but that remains to be seen.
I think Tony's answers is rather comprehensive. One point that I would like to add on my side, which is a striking fact when looking at key performance indicators nowadays, is really the difficulty we face with staffing generally. I mean, and I know Ulrika will come back to, you will want to come back to that at a later point of the discussion, but it's definitely something when looking at the results that we see we're still understaffed for the order intake that we took in a post-recovery period. And that, I've never seen anything like it, to see that really job market nowadays has become a seller's market to very high degrees, and staff retention, onboarding new staff, managing to attract talents is definitely something that must be on our agenda as well for the I mean, it is already but still need to be continue doing more on that.
Absolutely. Kevin, anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, just one more example to Jeremy's point. Now there's a huge people management, talent management component, and it's just one more hat that the CFO has to wear. I think eventually we'll get to a place where they just run out of places to they run out of hats to wear. But yes. One thing I want to add is that, unfortunately, I think there may be some stability emerging with interest rates, to Tony's point. So I think that's a good thing, but there's still going to be some, underlying complexity that's still yet to unfold. There's quite a few regulations and compliance issues that are looming. VAT in the digital age, like Vita, in the EU space is still unfolding, still developing, and is set to sort of hit the market in 24 and 25, and just adds another layer of complexity to an already complex market.
Absolutely. So I think we've talked about what are the factors, both the internal as well as external, right? But now, and I think Tony, you were kind of alluding to this in terms of profitability. What are CFOs and finance leaders? How are they actually responding to these uncertainties, right? Mm-hmm. So there's still an expectation, of course. There's still pressure to grow, right? Despite these headwinds, there's still pressure to grow. But given that, how are you going to fund that growth? And so in the survey, these were the top areas that CFOs and finance leaders said that what they would do to increase that profitability to fund that growth, right? And I'm not going to read these all off here. I think you can read it off here, but you can see a lot of them are actually related to cost, reducing business travel, consolidating suppliers, right? Shifting contract labor, enforcing stricter spending rules and limits, right? And I think what I find interesting here is that a lot of these are very around basically getting control of spend, and yet nearly half, or 46%, say they lack the full visibility into that spend. And so that begs the question, how are they going to be able to do that? So you might see a poll to the audience out there that we're going to pop up right now. It says, how much visibility do you have into your spend, actually? Let's see if that actually jives with this 46% number that we got in the survey results. So we'll give it a few seconds. And then Jeremy, Tony, and Kevin will talk about the results here in a second. I'll give folks to respond. I think another key area, of course, where they're cutting costs is to do layoffs. And one interesting part of the survey is it said nearly 9 in 10, or 87%, said that layoffs were a last resort, effectively, and that it may solve a short-term problem, but they recognize it creates long-term issues, which gets into talent management, which we'll get into the next slide, Jeremy. So we'll hold on that thought for a minute. But let's take a look at the answers here. It looks like some of you have 100% visibility into spend. Fantastic. But it also looks like on the other end that some of you don't have that insight into this spend. So I guess maybe Kevin, looking at these poll results, like, does this surprise you? And you're engaging often with finance leaders who are having some of these challenges. You've got a great purview. What's your reaction to these results?
Yeah, so it's not surprising at all that organizations don't have the visibility that they need when it comes to spend management, or when it comes to cash management, cash and liquidity. I think both areas are sort of still in a place where it's still dominated by still quite a bit of paper, legacy applications, spreadsheets are still king in a lot of places. And I think because of that, you just run into visibility issues across the board. I know that the research that we've seen when it comes to having visibility to cash, we have less than 46%, less than 44% have visibility to cash beyond 90 days. The ability to see that cash and predict that cash accurately beyond 90 days, right? So that's quite a huge sort of blind spot when it comes to spend management. One of the things that we see on our surveys when we talk to the customers, or when I talk to financial leaders, is that I want to reduce my cost through spend management, but I also want to provide better supplier experience, right? I want to make sure that my suppliers have access to the latest information, statuses of their payments. So to provide a better supplier experience is something that they highly desire as well. And then the final thing I'll say is that for the most part, the folks that I end up talking with, what they truly desire with this visibility is ultimately control, right? So the idea is I want to be able to control exactly when I make a payment, the way I make a payment, where in the payment term date I make a payment. So if I want to, on a 210 net 30 payment cycle or payment terms, if I want to pay it in day 29, I want that ability to pay it in day 29 so I can hold on to cash. Or I want the ability to speed it up and take advantage of that 2%, right, when necessary. So what I want is control to speed it up or slow it down. And Rika digs that because she's a race car fan, right? What would you be, how would you be able to drive if you can't have both the accelerator and the brake? I think a lot of organizations right now don't have those pedals when it comes to spend management.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it, whether they're pedals or like levers that you can adjust, right? So these are things like we see here. Each of these things are levers that can be adjusted. I wonder, Jeremy and Tony, when you see these levers, whether it's enforcing stricter spending rules and limits, like how do you think about that, and where do you kind of start in terms of those levers?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think, Ulrika, the way that I would kind of summarize it is, obviously we talked about top line uncertainty right there, and price increase to some degree, I think is with inflation, et cetera, is being more accepted in the market, right? But there's kind of a range of what you can do there, right? And then you go down to the next kind of lever from a top line perspective, and that is, I think, taking your investments across your company and trying to align them with the most kind of fruitful or profitable ventures that your company does, right? That's where you're getting the most bang for your buck. And then that leads you directly into, well, how do I do that? How do I know what I'm spending on what solutions or goods or what have you that I'm delivering? And to Kevin's point, at that kind of point of visibility and way deeper than that, people don't really have enough visibility or a system or processes in place to control it, right? For me, it's more about trying to control my golf ball on a Saturday morning, and which I have no trouble doing, rather than a race car. I don't have the guts that you do where you can drive it. But let me give you kind of some real life examples just to get to the front lines, right? I mean, most of the folks that I talk to that are considering Coupa or considering what to do, they've addressed their CRM needs for many, many years. Their HCM, we all know people are really our biggest asset, right? High quality talent. But the rest of their spending is now coming into light because of the drive and the need for profitability, right? And, take supplier contracts, for example. most companies, especially global companies that have grown and done acquisitions, and they have leaders in different places that manage a business line or a P&L, they have people they know for decades. They've done deals with or contract suppliers, right? And those contracts sit somewhere in a local, shared drive or in a file. To Kevin's point, believe it or not, there's a lot of paper out there still, right? We still get some paper checks for payments, which is kind of shocking. But and therefore, as a whole, the company can analyze, where are all my supplier contracts? Where am I spending money? Can I consolidate them to put that volume to one supplier and perhaps negotiate a bigger discount? Is there certain commitments that we have or contracts that are coming up to the end of the contract we don't need to renew? How do I put those controls in place? And if you don't have visibility to that or a mechanism or process to do it, it's hard to do. Another one that is listed here is, kind of enforcing stricter spending rules and limits. I mean, you need to have everything running through a workflow with the right level of detail, visibility, justification, et cetera. And you need to be able to change the thresholds on that workflow, perhaps insert new individuals or remove individuals from the workflow. So that profitability kind of focus that most CFOs have right now, it's hard to do if you don't have control and process in place to push and pull those levers. I'll use Kevin's term, the gas and the brake.
And the clutch if it's manual transmission. So, which is more fun. That's another conversation. Jeremy, anything else to add there in terms of the controls piece or in terms of what you're seeing?
I mean, I like very much what Tony said about the range for price increase. I think as in our respective organization, we've all agreed and acknowledged that, we have to accept some price increases from providers. But the question is, depending on the kind of sub-suppliers, the kind of market, what is the reasonable pricing increase to accept? I think this is always the difficulty in this environment when we just know that price increases are coming from all directions. And yes, on visibility, the complexity of not having group-wide systems to analyze data results is a loss of time nowadays that no one really apprehends and actually no one really understands. I mean, we were mentioning the current banking crisis. I mean, nowadays no one would understand. My peers no one would understand. It takes me more than a few minutes to tell them what's our exposure to Credit Suisse in Europe or Silicon Valley Bank in the US. These are questions that requires an immediate answer. That's just and the more time we need to gather this data, the less time we need we are actually available to take the sound decisions and to brainstorm on this. So on our side, from a working capital management, we have a fantastic solution to be able to see our bank accounts and payment processing on group level. This is great, but it doesn't particularly help with cost cutting, for example, and cutting spend without visibility. I mean, full strategic visibility. Somehow will just limit us to taking the obvious small steps like internal traveling or internal entertaining, which will be the easy pieces to limit and get things done. But to more strategic items, of course, it's difficult, especially now trying to get out of a supply chain shortage, at least for certain equipment. How do we, how are we able to adjust without taking a bigger risk at the end of the road?
Yeah. On Jeremy's point, sorry if you want to go first.
Oh no, go ahead, Tony.
Okay, just a quick one to insert on Jeremy's point. It's hard to make decisions without the full picture, meaning whether it's revenue or cost, right? Because you could make a decision to limit travel or to cut suppliers, right? But you can't do that without knowing what the impact on your revenue is going to be, or your top line, or your business in general, right? Your development, whatever it may be. So you really, it kind of becomes a bit of a circular equation. When you cut costs, revenues are going to go down, but you kind of have to cut costs or manage them well in order to drive more profitability in a lower revenue, lower growth environment, if you will. So I think it just hits home on the point that both Kevin and Jeremy raised and I spoke about, that broad visibility across the big vectors of, your customers, your employees, and all your suppliers, and pulling those all together. You really need that in order to manage the business successfully.
And just really quick, just a really quick point. I think in recent news, right, we've seen some companies do, sort of the ultimate thing when it comes to cost cutting, which is do some layoffs. They announce layoffs, right? And now recently we've seen some of those companies have to go back and announce another round of layoffs, right? Now think about how, gut wrenching that is to try to do one time, then let alone to have to come back and say, okay, well, we didn't really, achieve our cost cutting goals, or now we need to cut more just a few months later. It just makes you, it's a demonstration of a lack of visibility, a lack of, insight into, your business. It drives share price down for a lot of the public companies, right? It's not something you want to do more than once, right? So, but we've seen, unfortunately, some very large companies have to go back and sort of, do it again. It's just a bad look across the board. And I think it goes back to some of these issues around visibility and control.
So I think we've talked a lot about what our finance leaders and CFOs are going to do, but maybe let's transition a bit into like, how are they going to do that, right? What are the strategies they're going to implement to increase that profitability? And in the survey, the top three that surfaced were increasing efficiency, increasing digitization, and actually retaining employees, which Jeremy alluded to earlier. So, and these are actually all interrelated. So we can be a little bit fluid here, gentlemen, as we discuss this, but I think especially increasing efficiency and digitization, right? Those really go hand in hand together. I think one interesting thing in terms of those is if you're not 100% digital, Kevin, I think you mentioned earlier, there's still companies that have very manual processes, right? Because you're not digital, you're not very efficient. And so we're going to launch a poll here to the folks in the audience here to ask you how, in the spirit of digitization, how are you going to increase, or are you planning to increase automation of certain finance processes over the course of the next year? So if you want to pop that in there, and then we'll talk about the results in a minute. We'll give that some time. But in the survey, kind of the numbers behind these numbers is 44% said that they have labor-intensive processes to gather data. To your point earlier, Jeremy, in terms of getting the group data together, that can be quite labor-intensive and very time-consuming. And yet 93% of finance leaders agree that that automation is going to help put their company in a much better position to be able to respond to today's economic challenges. So given this, I guess, how are you guys thinking about, a lot of leaders are very concerned about efficiency and digitization, and we're seeing that actually in the live poll results here. It looks like 78% of you have said yes, you plan on increasing automation of finance tasks over the next year. So I guess, like, what's kind of standing in the way then of being more efficient or increasing digitization? How are you the three of you thinking that? What is it that you're seeing in the market? Maybe Kevin, from your perspective, as you're speaking with CFOs and finance.
So I think the issue comes into play when you start talking about automation. It can still sometimes feel like a bit amorphous, a bit broad, right? We hear terms coming out of some of the vendor community. They'll talk about autonomous. They'll talk about automation, and as a CFO or or a head of IT that's trying to make this decision, comb through all the marketing terms and marketing speak and really get to what you need. Oftentimes, it can feel daunting to engage in some of these automation kind of tasks. What we've done at IDC, we've sort of recognized that and sort of broken it down into different use cases where maybe you don't have to automate all of finance right now, Maybe you just focus on accounts payable, and maybe not even all of accounts payable, right? Maybe you just automate the invoice ingestion part, right? Get the data from emails, PDFs, EDI, what have you, right? However you end up getting your invoice information, get that get that into the system in an automated fashion, right? Something as simple as that. So taking this big, huge, amorphous kind of let's automate, sentiment, and breaking it down into some really, sort of tactical, pinpoint areas where you can increase efficiency by increasing automation. Anywhere where you see a huge amount of data, colliding with a lack of people horsepower, are places where you can pinpoint automation to really have a great effect.
Mm-hmm. Now, another.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tony.
I could add into that if you don't mind. On what Kevin said, I think number one, Kevin's correct. I mean, let's be real as CFOs or other finance leaders. We tend to be skeptical, right? Sales folks generally have a lot of buzzy marketing words about 100% automation and crazy returns and things like that. So we tend to be somewhat skeptical. So that's kind of one thing. I think a lot of people have had experiences in the past where maybe implementing a system didn't turn out the way that they were that it was sold to them. On the flip side, though, many have had great success, and we all know that we need automation. And I think the other big kind of barrier at the outset can be the cost, right? I mean, I think that if you're going to implement something that's really going to have a meaningful impact on your business and help you in the long term, upfront, you've got to spend some money on it. You've got to bring in implementation partners, and your team has to spend a lot of time on it, right? Taking them away from other activities. And so there is an upfront cost, and you're constantly kind of trading off which upfront costs you can do this year versus it's too many and we've got to do it next year. So that's why I think a lot of focus has gone to the return, right? The time it takes to get to a return on that investment. Am I going to be sitting here in 9 months or a year and seeing like whether it's hard dollar kind of returns or productivity returns, or maybe I don't have to hire as many people to process stuff going forward because that automation is in place and I can scale better at a more cost-effective way. And the last thing I'd say is these three things listed on this slide, Ulrika, really come down to, I don't know, a mantra that I myself use and I know many CFOs use, which is people, process, technology, right? I mean, from a people perspective, arming them with systems that are modern, that are effective, it makes their job more interesting, more fun. They get to work on, more challenging items, areas that drive more value versus doing things like simple data entry, which no one really wants to spend their time doing. And then digitization obviously is a technology thing, and efficiency can be both technology and process, right? So all these kind of intertwine in the best-in-class companies.
I join both. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I join both. I mean, Kevin and Tony on the fact that efficiency is not something that just can be declared. It must be lived and required deep diving into processes with a clear idea or rather philosophy of the blueprint that needs to be achieved. So an example, I would be the first one happy to say, I want a paperless organization. But I'm dependent on my stakeholders. If my suppliers say, sorry, we're not doing this, we still work like that. If my bank says, sorry, I need something that's signed on paper and sent by DHL and needs 2 or 3 weeks to be processed, then I must live with that. And that's, we still live in a world that's not fully there. So we can't fully get rid of this. And this efficiency that we're striving for will still be limited. I mean, you see, in the US that even after COVID, 10% of the non-cash payment are still done by checks. But you'd think that this sort of things would have stopped by then. Huh? So it's really having philosophy as a commitment. In my role, for example, I see a bank account. Every single bank account has a very expensive administrative burden. And I would fight to prevent opening any, and just try to make sure that we can leverage on our tool to avoid that. And back to keying in data in systems. Sometimes I feel terrible for my team members when asked to gather data from different systems. I feel so terrible that I would micromanage and do it myself. Because I don't want to, going to retaining employees, I wouldn't want them to just feel, oh, my job is awful. I have to gather things from 10 ERP systems to just be able to do a report and try to eliminate master data duplicates and things like that. I'd rather sometimes prefer to do it myself rather than facing the frustration of my closer guys. So yeah, that's really when it comes to that, it's all linked to one another, and it's difficult as well going into the last point really for team members to see that in our private life, all of us, we can pretty much manage everything with mobile apps, but corporate life is just very old-fashioned.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Jeremy, actually, if that's the expectation, like if you're thinking of recruiting the next generation of future finance leaders, right? Like that's the world they're used to, right? Everything is on your mobile phone, everything's in an app, and yet the corporate experience may not necessarily reflect that. So where do you see technology playing a role, not only in retention, like we're seeing here on this slide, but also in recruitment of employees?
I've spoken with quite a few organizations and helped them sort of come up with the rationale and build the business case for getting spend management solutions. And one of the things recently that's been, sort of rocketing to the top is the idea of the employee experience, right? Like I'm doing this so that I can, become more efficient, sure. But also that efficiency means that my employees are happier, which also, you can draw a straight line between happy employees and happy suppliers, right? And then I think ultimately I'm able to keep the talent that I have. I can use my, sort of automation capabilities. I can use my technology investments as a enticement for bringing in new talent. And I think what's really important here is that we need to understand, I think, especially in the U.S., there's been a decrease in college students that are even taking accounting courses, right? That are even doing accounting majors. So it's imperative that we sort of leverage technology to improve the experience, because we've seen an incredible amount of attrition, and that's because, to be quite honest, a lot of accounting jobs are tedious and then also high pressure. Can you imagine, sort of having to do all the tedium and then having that sort of end of the month, end of the period pressure, and then rinse and repeat? It just leads to a lot of, wasted weekends and wasted evenings away from family, and it burns the folks out. And I just think that, we can't understate the power of technology investment as also as both an investment in efficiency and an investment in your people.
Yeah, I think to Kevin's point, all of us in finance throughout our careers, when we've interviewed for jobs, part of what we're listening for or back channeling about is what's it like in there? Is it a mess? Is it, is nothing organized? The processes are terrible, and therefore everyone's scrambling and cranking nights and weekends to get the job done. Or is it pretty good? Like good environment, good systems, good process. Sure, there's peaks and valleys on, closing the quarter, closing the month, reporting to the board, things like that. But we got some pretty good stuff in place, and no one really, no prospective employee really wants to enter that messy environment. It's really a quality of life concern. I think all of us, I know I have thought about that when we've interviewed for jobs over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
So we've talked to, go ahead, Jeremy.
Sorry, I always do that to you. Sorry. No, and yeah, back to that. I mean, I started as well today saying that, recruiting has become a an open door. It's very difficult, and it's pretty much true across all types of jobs nowadays. Technical or support functions. And yeah, driving change and reaching efficiency requires you to hang on your best talents. And technology definitely helps attracting the right people, because it demonstrates that as a company, we've, let's say, overtaken Stone Age in our processes, and it's a sign that mostly the employees will spend time doing activities that add value. The thing is always, what do you start first? Do you start by improving your processes, or try to attract the people? And the thing is, you actually need these people to be able to do the change. So, and you're asking a lot from them. And at the moment, I'm asking a lot, of course, from my team to drive for change, to make these improvements, while on the other side, there's a job market that is striving for these talents. So, it's counterproductive for me to ask a lot from them, to exhaust some of them, while on the other side, the external opportunities are knocking on the door. So it's a bit, as mentioned, job markets, we've switched to a seller's market now, and then active job seeking has changed, very much. So it's technology definitely attracts, but we need to be able to drive both at the same time.
Ulrika, before you move on, there's one point I want to make, and I think Jeremy sort of touched on it. Sometimes technology, the use of it, kind of creates new complexities and new challenges. I know for a lot of AP professionals, the number of supplier portals that you have to deal with in a given day is just maddening, because everyone's trying to automate and do their thing, and no one's coordinating. And if you got 200 portals that you have to deal with on a given basis, that's another layer of complexity. So technology in and of itself isn't necessarily the cure-all. There needs to, Tony's point, there needs to be some policies and some processes tied to them as well.
Yeah. Actually, I think that's actually a good segue, whether that was intentional or not, Kevin, to the next topic, which is around where are people investing in technology, right? Mm-hmm. And as you said, if there's almost too many technologies, Jeremy, you mentioned having to pull data from multiple ERP systems, that can be very labor intensive. That's an example of creating complexity. Yes, there's technology, and yet you're adding complexity to somebody's job that they may not necessarily find very fulfilling, right? So according to the survey, these are the main areas where they see opportunities for increasing productivity anywhere. I'm not going to read them all off, but from treasury management, we see some AP related processes, from invoicing and payments all the way to procurement and T&E. Question for the three of you, what's your reaction to this? Is this surprising? Is there anything on here, in terms of, or how are you thinking about, when you see these results, where do you think that most finance leaders or CFOs should be focusing on? Maybe Kevin, we can start with you, because sure. I know you're kind of living this, meeting with CFO finance leaders every day and talking about this very topic.
Yeah. So I guess it's somewhat dependent a little bit on the type of business you have, but say if you're in a CPG or fast moving goods organization, invoicing is a huge issue. And it's also a huge data management problem, right? Whereas, some of these other ideas, the TD and some of these things, there are also data management problems, but I don't think you have as many expense reports in a given period as you would invoices, right? It could be tens of thousands of invoices in a week in some of these larger organizations. So I think invoicing and being able to, apply technology into that process, whether it be, two-way, three-way, four-way matching, invoice ingestion, the approvals, my God, making sure that the people, can get approvals go to the right people at the right time, and those sorts of things. To me, invoicing is a huge area here, but not to be, it's tough for me to sort of pick one, because I also look down at, supplier management and, taking all the status calls and suppliers asking you, where's my money? And, when am I going to get paid? That's a huge irritant and a time sink for folks in the finance office as well. So for me, it's spend management for sure. And if I had to pick one out of here, it'd be invoicing.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with Kevin. I think invoicing is probably one of the biggest problems, and also one of the most kind of data intensive, things as far as the process. But I would also say you can kind of bucket a lot of things with that on the front end, with contracts, on the back end with payments. So one thing I wanted to point out was that kind of rising up the list these days. It's on the top of your list is treasury. I think number one, leaving aside the kind of U.S. bank crisis we had a couple weeks ago, interest rates are up, right? And companies are therefore focusing more on cash conservation, which leads to fewer expenditures in many cases. But companies are also focused on, okay, geographically, where's my cash in different banks in different countries to meet the needs of payroll suppliers? And number two, to the degree I have cash, what kind of return am I getting on that cash without extending too far into a riskier investments, right? I mean, you have your cash sitting there, rates are up, you should, in some safe investments, consider getting a return there. And then, of course, now with, the kind of banking stuff, I mean, people are more focused on, diversifying. I wouldn't say portfolio, that's more of a, but their portfolio, but also just where their cash sits, right? To protect their cash. So treasury of late, with higher rates and the risks out there, seems to be talked about more and more.
I think as Kevin mentioned, it depends really on the type of company. On our side, we're an international project business, so invoicing is not, that big of an issue. We have, 10 invoices over 3 years for large projects. It's not that big, but treasury management is definitely one. For the same reason that Tony mentioned. I mean, when interest rates are above 5%, well, you're getting close to having the return on capital you expect in the heavy industries. So, and actually, when looking at investment as well, treasury management, because the business case is as well the easiest to be made for this exact reason, especially for an international business that works with dozens of different currencies on an even basis. You could quickly, if your treasury system or payment system is not up to date, lose out on the overnight interest rate, and this accumulates over the year, can represent a really large amount of money that you're missing on. So usually I would focus the business case on treasury and try to see how can I make side improvements in all the processes. But it's not just about where to invest in its or which topic is how. Is what system can help me out. And Kevin mentioned earlier as well in our call that the role of CFO and finance leaders is expanding, requiring a lot more skills than maybe was in the past. And the objective, of course, for us is to try and keep a system that a one size fits all, basically, so we don't have to add complexity to already a complex role. And on my side, of course, there never was a system that would cover all processes, but I still hope that we see this continuing to emerge, that the system can continue embracing all processes from procurement, invoicing up to treasury management, payments, and trade finance.
I don't want to change my answer, but I just love what you guys said so much, because I've talked to a ton of treasurers, and many of them feel like they can't be as aggressive as they want to be, because they don't have the visibility into contracts. They don't have the visibility into the receivables. So there's this idea that, like, if we can get the visibility into inflows and outflows, then treasurers can actually be engines for growth in some ways. So really exciting what you guys are talking about. Very topical.
So last question before we switch it over to Q&A in the last 5 minutes here. So there are solutions within each of these areas: treasury management, invoicing, compliance, procurement, that address each of these. So how do you think about point solutions or platform? And what's your advice to those that are listening in today in terms of how to think about their tech stack?
Yeah. So I'm just going to jump in here because this is a thing for me. The functions are all related, right? I just talked about how if I'm a treasurer and I can see the information, my obligations and the contracts that are coming up in the next 6 months, and I can see my promises to pay on the revenue side, I can be aggressive, right? I can put my money into some 7-day bonds, right? I can be aggressive in the market, in the currency markets. I can do things to really help the company as a fiduciary stay ahead of things. So I tend to think that the world is moving to the Oscar movie around data, that Oscar movie that won everything, the everything everywhere all at once, right? The idea is that all of this data needs to be able to be accessed, put together, recombined, so that the treasurer can be aggressive about those kinds of things. Procurement can take advantage of discounts, right? It's across the board. If we all have access to this data, and I know I'm talking a little bit down the line when it comes to the future, but the API world is starting to develop to a place where, yeah, I think it's going to be an integrated future, and if we have that, we'll be in a much better place to really do some of these exciting things and give the treasurer, the CFO, head of accounting, all ways to be aggressive in their own world.
Tony and Jeremy, anything to add there before we switch over to our last poll and Q&A?
No, I think Kevin covered it.
Yeah, I'm so passionate.
Bravo,
guys, so passionate.
A good Oscar-winning performance, then, Kevin.
I didn't watch that movie.
I highly recommend it, I will say. So while you all are thinking of your questions, and I know we've got some in the chat, which I'll pop over to, last poll question around resiliency and how resilient you feel your enterprise is. So please pop that in, the last question. And it looks like we've got some questions. Kevin, Tony, and Jeremy. Does the panel see the U.S. Congress cutting back on constant spending, which many, including Nobel winners in economics, say are exacerbating inflation?
That's a tough one. As Kevin noted earlier, it's hard for us to be, politics experts as well. I think, things are changing pretty quickly every couple of years, if you will, in the makeup of Congress and the executive branch, and presidency. I think that I would agree that constant heavy spending is contributing to the inflation problem, but I think there's a lot of space between the political parties that are kind of running the show right now. So it's a big question mark, and I think it contributes to a lot of the instability that we all have and uncertainty that we all feel.
Yeah. Jeremy, in Europe, what is the dynamic there, just to kind of balance things out from a regional perspective?
We have to put things back in their context. I mean, there's a war next door, 1,000 kilometers away from here, and definitely, not having the Russian petrol on the market or having it less with defined prices, with heavy sanctions, is definitely the main driver for inflation. I mean, we've all seen, simply gas prices here, multiplied by 4 or 5. So it's really been terrible, and that has a wider impact on the economy. So naturally, central banks are acting relatively quickly. I mean, you see the hikes, I mean, fever that's been in the past month and still continuing. Hopefully we reach the stabilization that Tony was talking about, but I hope so. I mean, I hope the geopolitical situation stays as it is. As mentioned, we have to look at what's happening Far East as well. But that's, definitely the main driver for the inflation right now. There's it's really cost driven. So with increase of cost and everything is we have this headlong rush that goes into that direction. So hopefully we see stabilization. It goes back to, I think, a midterm trend, I think, which is just doing business on a value chain basis as well, which is going to be a driver. And we see a lot of, I mean, at least in our business, a lot of investments in heavy industries in the Western world to show that actually some part of the industries cannot just be offshore.
All right, and I think last question here. I know we're at time, but appreciate those for sticking around. Traditional banks have failed to raise their deposit interest rates for excess funds in a rising interest rate environment. Do you see any viable digital alternatives for short-term investment of excess funds by CFOs? That's a loaded question there. That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, I don't personally want to give investment advice. We all feel that way. I mean, we work with advisors, Goldman, others that have some good thoughts about how to do this, right? And I think the key is getting advice from multiple parties or experts, right? You don't want to just have one. You want to have several kind of advisors as far as asset managers, right, for your capital. I think, to the point earlier, the job of the CFO has expanded so much that it's hard to also maintain that level of current, treasury knowledge. So you need to rely on the people around you or internally to make those decisions.
All right. Well, we're at time, and I know there was a question around, does the survey include any questions related to liquidity and risk? And the good news is all of you are going to receive a copy of it. There's more detailed data within that you can dive into. And thank you so much, Kevin and Tony and Jeremy, for joining us today. It was a brilliant discussion. And Eric, recognize we're a little bit over time, but I'm going to hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you for that amazing discussion. And thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us today for this really excellent webinar, and enjoy the rest of your day.